time, I could see that she had a lot of, she could be really good. She had a lot of skills. She was also very good at listening. She had a lot of the things that I think they look for with someone who, for the commitment level that competitive gymnastics requires. So she started kind of increasing her hours, and now she's doing 16 hours a week of gymnastics, which is a lot. But I personally have been really happy with the choice to get involved in it, because I see her as, she's healthy, she's learned how to be disciplined, she's developed amazing friendships, the ability to concentrate and focus on things, and that's kind of spilled over into other areas in life. It's also taught her a lot of lessons, right? Like, she's failed a lot of times. Like, she's gone to competitions and she's fallen, and things haven't worked out the way she wanted. So I feel really fortunate that she's kind of learning some of those lessons at a young age. And it's been an interesting experience as a parent, because I feel we make a lot of decisions for our kids. We listen to what they want. We try to check that they're always happy, but ultimately, especially when they're this younger, you end up making a lot of the decisions for them, because you can't expose them to everything, and they only know what they've been exposed to. So when you ask them, well, do you want to be doing gymnastics or do you not want to be doing gymnastics? They don't really know what that not doing gymnastics would look like. So I always kind of wonder, like, well, is this the right thing for her? But then I've also realized during COVID, we've got a bit of that experience. She now knows what life without gymnastics is like, and she still really misses it and still really wants to go back. So that's given me some assurances. So I know that we have a few people here that have either have their kids in competitive sports, or they themselves were involved in competitive sports as a kid. So I don't know if maybe quickly I've introduced myself. If anyone else maybe wants to introduce themselves, but you don't need to if you don't want to. But I did invite Nancy on. Her daughter's in gymnastics with Abby, but also Nancy did competitive gymnastics all through her young years and as a teenager. So she's got like both of those perspectives. I was not talented enough to do anything when I was young. So Nancy, maybe do you want to introduce yourself quick?
Hi, I'm Nancy Warren. Yes, I have a daughter in gymnastics, and I was also a gymnast myself. It's a different life. It's a different way of growing up, I guess. And there's, I don't have any regrets. And I think I've learned a lot about how, I learned a lot about how I want to handle it as a parent, but also a little bit about how I don't want to handle it as a parent. But that's kind of how it goes. Gymnastics is a tough sport. And I think that for me, like exiting the sport is something that I think as a parent, I want to make sure that I handle well. So.
Awesome. And we will get a bit more onto that. And what about Brett? Do you want, I know that you've got a son who's quite the hockey player.
So yesterday's talk was really good. But yeah, my son, I have a 10-year-old that plays AAA hockey. It's been a journey already. Like, he started playing hockey when he was 4 years old and organized, started skating when he was 18 months. So it was a little bit of it's been a learning experience, I guess, year after year, because I played competitive hockey, but you get caught up in it as a parent also. And so his first few years he was playing, he really wanted to be on the ice like every day, come home from school, I want to go on the ice, and I had to go to work and I couldn't take him. And so he'd be crying, and it was a real balancing act. And then now he sort of understands. The last 2 years he's been playing AAA hockey, and he wants his rest, and I'm just basically going off of him now. Like, I sort of changed the way, instead of pushing him, if he wants to play, I let him play, right? So if he doesn't want to do it, then I give him his rest days. He understands that he needs his rest days now. And so that's sort of where I've gone with it. So I know, Anita, you're, like you said yesterday, you're struggling with only being in one sport and pushing your kid. My thing is, if they love doing it and they want to keep doing it, especially now if you see that they're missing it a lot, then to continue taking them. And at their young age, they really don't know what the difference is. They don't know how to make that decision. My 10-year-old too, like, he loves playing hockey. I know he's missing it right now. And some days he doesn't want to touch a stick, and some days he does. It's been like so much, where before he was always on the ice. So I think he's starting to learn what he needs and what he doesn't need. And I just sort of go with what he says. I don't push him, but I really don't want him to quit either. I've already put a lot of energy and money and stuff into this too. So if he quit, that would be I'd be really disappointed if he quit. So I do try to encourage him the best I can, but also make sure that he gets his time away from the rink so that he doesn't get burnt out.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought we'd talk about is just kind of some tips about how you guys manage to make sure that there's still that kind of healthy balance. So for me, one of the things that I've kind of realized is the same. Like sometimes our kids just need a break. So it's important for them to be disciplined and know that practice is a commitment and that they're expected to be there and expected to participate. But sometimes I realize they just need a day off once in a while, and that's okay. They're not going to fall behind if they miss one day of training, that you take them out for one day just to kind of let their bodies rest a bit, let their minds rest a bit. When I kind of started, I felt like, no, they need to learn to be committed. And to be committed means they're going to show up. Unless they're sick, they need to be there. But I think I've realized a bit that sometimes they just once in a while need a mental health day and just kind of a day to, especially when they're doing like my daughter, she goes 4 days a week. So if she misses one day in a month, that's not a big deal. But it could really benefit her if she's getting to a place where she's starting to feel negative about gymnastics or about having to constantly be on the run and constantly not really getting the type of rest that they want. The other thing is the sleep schedule I found hard. Like these kids are up for pretty late hours that like Abby doesn't finish gymnastics till 8:30. So by the time we get home and she eats, like she's going to bed pretty late. And I imagine with hockey, it's sort of the same with some of the rink times. So I don't know if you guys have any tips for what you do when your kids are getting overtired and just getting cranky from that.
Yeah, so what we've done, so my kid's usually on the ice and usually going to like 8:39. Bedtime's usually, his normal days is 8 o'clock. So we try to do is when he gets home from school around 3 o'clock normal days, right? So which is good because it's early. We have about an hour and a half before we have to leave the house to go to his hockey. We usually try to do is have dinner, feed him dinner before we leave to go to hockey. And then after, if he's still hungry, I usually either bring a snack or I'll pick up a snack for him on the way home. Or when we get home, I'll have him have like a quick snack. So he's not having a full meal. And then he's usually showering in bed. And they're usually in bed by like 9:30, 10 o'clock. Yeah, it's late. And they get up early for school. But that's why I think also balancing the off days is good too. So on the off days, I'm not forcing him to go to extra hockey, extra skates. There's stuff every day. Every night of the week, I can go take him to something. But I've really stopped doing that because he does need that time where he needs to get to bed a little bit earlier. So those nights we don't have hockey, I do get him into a little bit earlier. Weekends, I let him sleep in. I don't wake him up. You know, if he wants to sleep, I let him sleep. We don't really push him to do anything. Like even now during this time, he's been sleeping till 10:30 every day, but he's also been staying up a lot later.
Yeah.
So
I have a bit of a night owl too, so, and her little sister is determined to go to bed at the same time as her. So they both go to bed around 9:30, 10 every day. But we get through it. What about schooling? Have you guys found any issues with like them? I know for Abby, she's younger, so she's only in grade 3, so it's not quite a thing yet. But I have found that in some ways, it's easier to get them to do their schoolwork because you just kind of have to say, well, if you're not doing your schoolwork, that's the priority. So your sport's not going to be there. And she's been pretty good about getting it done. And the other thing that I've done too is I've chatted with her teacher and just said, you know, like she'll get all her work done, but sometimes the same day work is really difficult because if there's something that is sent home that day and expected the next day, that's where we struggle a bit because she's at gymnastics from 4:30 to 8:30. Like, well, when is she going to get this done? If it's something that needs me to help her with. So, and the teacher's been has been fine with that. So sometimes even just communicating, I think, with your kids' teachers about their sporting needs or what they're doing and how much time they're spending on it is helpful. Just so the teacher also understands too and might understand why the kid's really tired one day or things like that. So.
We've done the same thing. Like I do the same thing. Every year at the end of the school year, I tell the teachers he's not going to get his homework done. If he gets it done, he gets it done. It's like same thing if it's due next day, very slim, it's going to get done, especially if hockey that night. But now that he's in grade 4, he's luckily had no homework the last couple years, which is good. But also he understands that he doesn't want to do homework at home. So what he's done is I think he's stayed in sometimes for recess. So sometimes he'll stay in, he'll miss some of his recess to finish his work. So he doesn't have to come home and do it. Like he's starting to understand the concept of, I have hockey tonight and I don't want to do the homework at home. So I'm going to get it done at school. So he just stays, he'd rather miss a little bit of his recess and get his work finished than bring it home to do. So that's sort of what I know he's 10 and it's like hard to understand that he is understanding all this stuff, but that's what he's been doing. And then if he does have homework, because he gets home at 3, we're usually like, okay, as soon as he walks in the door, he has a snack, homework, dinner, and out the door. And homework's only like 10, 15, 20 minutes at grade 4. So it's not that bad. I don't know what's going to happen when he gets into the later grades and where they have a little bit more homework. But right now we've been able to balance it.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think with balance too is like what activities do they say no to, and what ones do they sometimes say, okay, I'll miss a day of my sports. So I know that like with Abby, like there's certain birthday parties she hasn't been able to go to, because if you go to every single birthday party you're invited to in grade 1 or grade 2 and grade 3, like it's just, there's so many. But then there's some people that I'm like, no, that's your best friend. You're going to go to her birthday party, you're going to miss your training that day, right? So I've kind of found that it's important to not miss out too much because of their sport, but also finding that balance. And that's not always easy, but other than like competitions, which you can't really, or games, which are harder to get around. But like in terms of practice time, I think sometimes it is important just to remember that they need to spend time with their friends and their family and see those as important commitments too. And just kind of encourage, like teaching them that lesson of like, you're gonna have to say no sometimes, but not all the time.
Yeah, so we try to arrange like, my guy knows it's hockey first. So if he has hockey, there's nothing else. It's like we have hockey's first. He does miss a lot of birthday parties. This past year's actually been pretty good because our schedule was, we had a lot of like early morning games, like Saturday morning was our home game. So a lot of times birthday parties were later in the afternoon. So he was able to go to more birthday parties this year. But there was a time where he had a birthday party. We committed to go to the birthday party, and then our coach scheduled a practice. And we just told him we had to practice on the same time at the birthday party. We hadn't said anything about the birthday party yet, to canceling, not going to the birthday party. And my son went to school and told his friend that he can't come to the birthday party because he has hockey. And he had a hockey practice that got added in. So he already knows like what he can and can't do. But what we'll try to do is, if he misses that birthday party, like, and it's like a good friend from school, we'll maybe try to set up like a play date another day when he has an off day, so that he can at least still kind of celebrate the birthday with his friend on another day. Maybe not with everybody or at the birthday party, but at least he still gets to see his friend that way. That's sort of what we've done a little bit, but he understands that like there was one year where he missed every single birthday party for the whole season because there's always a conflict. So I mean, that he just understands, like, he wants to play hockey. His goal is to get as far as he can. He wants, like, his dream is obviously to go all the way if he can. If he can't, great. I'm trying to do the best opportunity. I try to give him the best opportunity he can to do whatever he wants to do with it. If he makes it all the way, great. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But I want to make sure he has all the opportunity and he understands where that comes from. But a lot of his close friends are his hockey friends. Like, even now, like, he's on FaceTime, playing video games with his hockey friends. Like, he's not really talking to his school friends that much since he's been home. It's been a lot of his hockey friends. So like last night, the whole hockey team was on Fortnite again, playing together. So he understands that, but a lot of his good friends are from hockey. And I think because he sees them more often and he's with them in a different atmosphere. It's more like a fun atmosphere than we're at school. You're more structured, and he is structured at hockey, but it's also fun and it's more social. So he just has closer friends. I think his friends with hockey are a lot closer than his school friends are. And yeah,
and I think that maybe is another thing that I wanted to talk to, and maybe Nancy could talk about as someone who kind of acts in the sport. So I sometimes worry that so much of Abby's identity has now become about gymnastics, which in many ways is awesome. But then I'm like, well, what happens if she gets an injury, and like a serious one? Like, she's hurt herself a few times. One time she was out for about 4 weeks. Another time she was out for 3 weeks. But you know, gymnastics is a risky sport, and if I'm being realistic, like, she could have a serious injury at some point. And then I always worry that, like, well, what if gymnastics is taken away from her? And what then? Like, does she have enough other supports that she's going to be able to, like, she's not going to fall into some sort of depression. So I do worry sometimes that, because her best friends are her gymnastics friends, right? Like, and that same thing. Like, she's on the Kids Messenger with them all day now that they're on. She has a couple of close friends from school, but she's definitely way closer with her gymnastics friends. And like, I know so much of her identity now is about being a gymnast. So I'm just wondering, for people who were, you know, really immersed in a sport when they were young and became so much about part of who they were, did you deal with injuries or stepping away? Was it hard? And maybe Nancy can talk for a second.
I think that once, I know for me at least, and so far for my daughter, once a gymnast, always a gymnast. And so that definitely becomes part of one's identity. I still pursue sports and activities that allow me to, I don't know, flip around and be upside down and do all of those things. So I don't know that that ever goes away once you've been in competitive sport. I think that exiting, that was definitely really hard for me. I didn't know what to do with myself with all that time. And I left on an injury. And also I was kind of starting to get jealous of, like, the other kids were starting to have parties and stuff, and they would talk about parties after that, you know, that they had on the weekend. And I didn't go. And so it was kind of like, I felt like I was ready, but then when it actually happened, I had no idea what to do with myself. And it took about maybe 3 months before I took up another competitive sport. I think that I took up swimming. And I think that, I don't know, I think that if I went through that kind of on my own. And I noticed at our gym club last year, there were a couple of gymnasts that were retiring, and I really, really appreciated the way that the club handled it. And it was sort of more like a celebration of what they'd accomplished, and an enthusiastic sort of farewell and on to your next big adventure. And I appreciated that, because I think in my experience, and I've worked with a few girls who had left gymnastics and did sink into a depression. It's part of my work. And that is a heartbreaking thing. I think we can prevent it, though, by kind of planning the transition and starting to build ties before we go, if at all possible. And just instead of it being a hard stop. But it's interesting, once your body's been doing something like that all the time, in my experience, I had to keep doing something. I had no interest in doing nothing after school or just like hanging out. So.
Yeah. Once an athlete, always an athlete. Now, what about anxiety? Have you experienced that your kids have been having any anxiety over expectations about, like, competitions, games? Are your kids nervous kids, or is it more just the nerves are with the parents?
For me, I think that I can't tell. I think that Annie has some anxiety. I certainly have all of that in my my past and in my present, and I'm more of a kind of perfectionist than she is, and so I have to be kind of careful. And sometimes I catch myself after the fact, and that's really, you know, awful. But I have to be careful about being too hard on her when she is going at her pace and not at, you know, when I'm like, I know you can do this. I'm sure I give her anxiety, but I don't know. Maybe I need parenting lessons. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you've seen me at the gym, so I get super anxious, like, especially before our competitions, and it's silly because she's fine. Like, she's been able to handle doing well, really well, and she's also been able to handle not doing well very well. When she falls, she just gets back up. She still has a smile on her face, and she just loves just going to the competitions and being with her friends and showing off in her, you know, fancy bodysuit. Like, she isn't as caught up in results as I find myself, right? So it's been a struggle for me to kind of keep remembering to check myself and like remember that this is her journey, not mine, and I'm supposed to just kind of support her, right? She has coaches. They're the ones who are there in place to teach her the skills and like monitor her growth. Like I'm really just supposed to be there to support her, but it's hard sometimes because you're so invested in your child, so you kind of feel like you are supposed to help them or do things or talk to them at home about things. But I kind of have come to the conclusion that there really doesn't need to be a ton of that. You need to kind of check that your child is happy. You know, if there's signs that something's going on, try and figure out what that is about. But otherwise, I think as parents, it's probably best just to leave things to the coaches if you have the right people in place. Like if you're confident your kid's at the right with the right coaches, then you just got to let them do their thing. And if they don't see a problem with their progression, they haven't spoken to you about it, then you don't need to create it and try and address it yourself at home. There's this one bar skill that Abby can't do. It drives me crazy, and I just want her to learn to do it. And it's been hard, like, because I feel like she can, but like, it's, I just realized I've just got to learn to let go and just try and cheer her on. And that's all I'm here to do as a parent. So.
Anita, I'd want to jump in a little bit and add, obviously this is from more of like an outside perspective, no kids, and it's been a while since I was a kid. But so I heard the other day on a podcast, actually about like being happy and stuff. And this woman really pushed back on the use of certain words. So one of them was like anxiety. So using the word anxiety on a 10-year-old in some ways is kind of like absurd, and just how our terminology has kind of derailed young people a little bit. And that's why like their maturity levels and they're actually anxious later in life. Whereas like maybe 20 years ago, we would have had the same level, but we would have said, oh, you've got butterflies in your stomach. You know, you're a little nervous before a competition and stuff, versus like a word like anxiety and saying like, oh, I have to make sure they're not like a nervous wreck and stuff. And then also kind of saying that you can't like completely shield kids. Like you do really need to have, I mean, I'm not sure what the exact number is, and I'm sure somebody's like done the math on it, but you need a few like fairly traumatic events in your childhood that you survive that make you functional later on. So the idea that, you know, maybe she loses all her friends at some point, but also, you know, people have got to move, right? Like, and you lose all your friends. Like, you know, you maybe like, it's all these other encounters, and maybe like going through something like that actually ends up 10 years later being like, yes, I lost all my friends at age 16 and I had to like reach out and meet these new people, but I developed this whole new skill set at age 16 of reaching out and meeting new people. So we are living in this, the problem with our life is we never know which negatives are actually positives and which positives are actually negative. Sometimes we get something really good and then we take it for granted and we don't work hard anymore. And other times we struggle and struggle and struggle, and like that struggle makes us better. So we don't really know at the end of the day what's going to happen. But I think just the parents overly protecting their kids from experiencing like those lighter forms of trauma can be as dangerous as too much trauma.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, when it comes to like coaching, like for example, Abby's coach, she's a bit old school. So some of the coaching methods may not be quite the ones that I would choose to use, but at the same time, there's nothing in them that's made me overly concerned that like this is inappropriate how they're coaching, but it's just a bit tougher. And I think that at the same time, like it's important for kids to have to kind of deal with that and kind of figure out their own way of like developing the skills of how to take that feedback from your coach and how to see it properly, right? So when and I had a talk, Abby actually one time burst out in tears, like, and didn't want to go to gymnastics one day, which was very unlike her. And like, Abby's a very quiet child. It's like, you ask her like, oh, how was today? She's like, good. And like, do you like your teachers? Yeah. Do you like any of your teachers more than others? Nope, they're all good. So it's hard to sometimes, I feel like, really get everything out of her. But one day she just burst out in tears and she just said, I'm the worst one in my group. They're all so much better than me. I keep trying and I can't get better. And I would have never thought this was all going through her head. But I know some of it comes from the way the coach often will use like, well, do it like Sophia does it, or do it like Chloe does it. Like, so there's a lot of that pointing at another person in the group and as like, that's how you have to do it. Which is not always, in my opinion, like necessarily the most productive way of teaching and coach, but it's saying this is who our coach is. So this is the situation she's in. So kind of explaining just the point of view that this is not about her so much comparing you to each other. This is how she was taught when she was a gymnast, and she's now using that as a coach. So it's not about you personally. It's more, and you have to understand she does it for everyone. There's things that they point and they say, do it like Abby, right? So there's people who are hearing it with you being the example, and just kind of like, I felt like her getting all the tears out and all the emotions out, and she almost wouldn't go into the gym. And then it was the cutest thing, like her 5 teammates ran over to her, hugged her, said, is everything okay? And like walked her onto the floor. And then she got back into practice, and and then she was like, no, I don't want to quit anymore as soon as the practice was over. And it was really heartwarming though, just to see like how tight her team was and how they kind of supported her in that. But one of the other things I wanted to talk about was, and I'm going to talk to Sandra and Nancy a bit about this, but I talked to Sandra a bit about kind of sometimes as parents we're worried we've put all of our eggs in one basket, we said, with pushing our kids into these competitive sports and investing all this. But Sandra kind of has the perspective of where she kind of wishes a bit more of that was done when she was growing up, and that she had the opportunity to pursue things at a level beyond recreation. So I'll pass it over to Sandra. Maybe she can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so I'll just talk. Yeah, I was a really, really, really good soccer player. Like always was playing somewhat rep, but my parents never actually allowed to really let me play rep soccer. One year I was fairly young, made the rep team. The rep schedule came out of our routes, and my parents were like, yeah, we're not going to do that. And I was already claimed captain of the team. And so my parents were like, we don't like those routes. Like, we don't want to travel. We don't want to do that. And like, if you knew like my history through like school, like I won athlete of the year at every school I went to, like all my grades. Like I have records in javelin in the region of Peel, just like very, very athletic kid and like very determined. Like people know me, like I'm always in the gym, always working. That's how I was in high school too. I'd be in the gym at school in the morning for a morning practice, at the school at night for another sports teams practice. There's times I was doing 2 sports teams at once kind of thing. And I know if my parents had just allowed me to focus on one sport, I would have gone really, really far in that sport. And like, I wish my parents allowed me to do that, but they were more focused on us. Like, you know, we can go to the cottage on the weekend instead of playing the sports. And I get that's like the family dynamics that my parents wanted. I just, for myself and like knowing where I am now, like I rather be playing sports. I'd rather be working out. I'd rather be working really, really hard. And they've always known I've always been this really, really hardworking kid. This is not like a surprise. It was just, I don't know if they just didn't understand it. Like my dad grew up poor. Like we're talking like 4 kids in a little house in Woodbridge, no extra money to play sports. So I don't even know if they had the knowledge about being a competitive athlete as a kid. I think they just thought that sports was just something you got to do for fun if you had that extra bit of money. And so I didn't get to pursue to go further. And just knowing myself with my kids, like if they want to play and go to a high level, I'm going to be their biggest supporter. Like I'll do anything for them. And that's just how I'm going to go about it. I'll if I'm going to miss a weekend at the cottage, whatever. They're going to get more joy out of that. They're going to get to pursue their dream. That's the reason I had kids, right?
Awesome. And Nancy, one of the things we wanted to talk about is kind of like, is there anything that you wish your parents had done differently when you were a young gymnast, and like anything that you think that we as parents should be keeping in mind?
I think I had a rough exit from gymnastics. During gymnastics, I think my parents, or from what I recall, my parents were pretty supportive and I didn't feel like they were disappointed in me if I didn't do well or if I did do well. I feel like they handled that part really well. When I left, but I was very much up in my head, and I still am today, but I back then was very much up in my head, and I don't know how much they knew about what was going on. When it was time for me to and I think the language is weird too. You quit gymnastics or you retire from gymnastics, and neither of them quite fit when you're like, 13 or 14. Like it's an early time to be retiring. So I think my parents sort of sat back and watched how the adjustment away from gymnastics went. And well, I had a really hard time. I really didn't know what to do with myself. I felt like all the kids knew each other better. And I miss my gymnastics friends. And I'd go into the gym. I did phase out slowly, but as soon as you're phasing out, you're kind of like off on the trampoline doing your own thing, and it's not part of what everyone's doing anyway. And I don't know. I think phasing out of gymnastics was hard, and I'm not sure how my parents could have done it differently, except for maybe to be upfront about what was happening. Like what was happening is that I was shifting from one part of my life to another part of my life, and that was okay. And there's, I no matter, even though they never made me feel like I wasn't good enough or anything like that, I definitely held on to a lot of guilt for quitting gymnastics. I don't remember them placing it on me, but somehow I got it. So I don't know. I think that handling it in putting everything on the table and talking to kids about what's happening might be helpful, and normalizing the emotions that they may be feeling, making it
because it was probably a difficult time for them too, because I imagine a lot of their lives are invested in your gymnastics, so it's probably also like they were going through a bit of a grieving process as well. Because we invest so much time as parents with like money, all the time, and you just have these expectations, and then I've heard with certain sports, it's just all of a sudden over, and like it just changes so quickly, and then you both are kind of in this new life, and probably maybe just having some open, frank conversations is a good way to at least try and make the transition a bit easier.
I grew a foot in a year after I quit gymnastics. And that was a lot as well, to go through that kind of physical change. And I went back into a competitive sport, into competitive swimming. But between the time that I left gymnastics and started competitive swimming, which honestly took 2 or 3 months, I tried smoking in an alley with a friend. Like it could have gone very wrong. And on some, I did my fair share later on in life, but I'm grateful that I knew I was in touch enough with my body and my own experience to know that what I needed was to get back into a sport, as opposed to, take up heavy drugs or something. I don't know, but I definitely I work with kids who didn't have that insight or didn't have that experience and got themselves into a lot of trouble. So I think helping to fill, the parents could maybe keep an eye on helping to fill the time, or making sure the times that they're not just off in an alley smoking cigarettes. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting time, because a lot of times the same time where some of these kids decide a sport's not for them is around the same time where all these temptations are around, and like all the partying in high school happens, and it's a degree of partying is good, but then another degree can become pretty dangerous, especially nowadays with some of the drugs that are available now for teenagers.
If I can jump in on that, I've trained a lot of kids from young ages to basically all the way until like they're in their 20s. And I've trained, especially, it's actually been a lot of hockey players where they went from playing AAA hockey to getting to the point that they started to hate hockey because of how much pressure there is and all the politics, and there's a lot of issues going along with it, to them finally making it to the OHL, 1 year in and then quitting. And I think that transition period is actually extremely important, because it's one thing to transition on your own terms or being forced to transition. So anytime you get the transition on your own terms is already better. And the ones who I've seen that actually came out of it the best were the ones who actually also transitioned in, like Nancy was saying, into other sports. So I've had some clients who I've trained that ended up playing rugby. They went from OHL hockey to playing rugby for their schools. And yeah, they're playing at a high level, but to them, it wasn't as much of a focus for so many years. So they immediately were having more fun, and they had such a smoother transition. The ones who didn't transition into any other sort of sport or any other way that they could basically, get some physical energy off them, those ones were the ones that turned to drugs, turned to partying, turned to some of the crappier things. They dropped out of school. And I think, like you said, once a gymnast, always a gymnast. I think once an athlete, always an athlete. Like, that foundation that you build becomes who you are on such a deep level that just moving.
Oh, you're muted. Steve, you're muted.
Even if it's not at an elite level, I think it's going to have, basically what I was saying is having something to transition into that's going to be physical, that you can feel like an athlete. In the same way with CrossFit, we've had a lot of former athletes come into the gym saying, I used to do this, I used to do this, I used to do this. I've been depressed for 10 years because I haven't done anything since college. And all of a sudden they get back in here and they're like, I feel like I've got an outlet again. I feel like I can be an athlete again. I feel like I can pursue something that is, it's for me, and I feel like it's valuable because it's something that I can actually work on getting better at outside of just work or outside of just my regular social scene.
Yeah, I loved finding CrossFit because it was kind of something where I was like, I could still build on something and I could do it at any age. Like, whereas a lot of sports are so, like, after a certain age, Ultimate Frisbee's been pretty good that way. Like, I play Ultimate, and that's something where we do have like masters leagues, and I've been able to still play as I've aged. But a lot of other sports is not quite the same way. So it was like really great finding CrossFit and being like, I have something again that I can build. I can work on things. I can see progress. I can have goals again to work towards. And it's just been so much more motivating than the fitness routine I was kind of in before that. I did want to ask maybe like Rob and Steve or Sandra, like I know you guys train a lot of kids too. Do you have any advice for parents that you see sometimes things that you kind of think they're not quite doing the right thing with, or things that they are doing the right things with their little athletes?
I can talk from like the educational standpoint because I have a lot of athletes that I teach. Like, I've been blessed enough that I work in schools where, one of my girls plays on Team Canada for basketball. Like, she's playing for Queen's University now, basketball. I have kids that are on the national team of Canada for badminton. And kind of like Brett said, like, these kids, a lot of these kids that are in these high level sports that really, really get it are in on their lunch doing their homework. Or like Bella, my girl that plays basketball, I taught her since grade 10, and she'd always come in on her lunch for extra help. Always had her and it was like very well known to me, like they were busy after school. So I knew like sometimes accommodation, they couldn't get stuff the next day. That's no problem. Like, I'm the teacher. I was like, hoorah, I love sports. Like, I'm a big supporter. You are going to run into teachers that hate it. And I'm going to put it out there. And I don't get those teachers. I don't get them. I don't get how you can stop a kid from pursuing a passion. I don't get that. Just be aware that you will run into teachers like that. Get them switched out of the classes if you can. Like, that's try to find the teachers that are the big supporters there of the sports and willing to go out of the way. In high school, once the kids get to high school, as you guys said, if kids are staying up late, they might need extra sleep. Think about taking them out of first period, maybe make a first period spare, changing their schedules around a little bit to better suit their needs. I think that's one of the best things I've seen. Like, I had a competitive figure skater last year in my class. So she'd miss a couple classes. Every Tuesday morning she was missing because she was in skating that morning. And I knew that, and like she would come in and check in on with me in lunch. So I know from my end, like, I've always been really supportive of my kids in sports, but there's other things that you guys can do, like change around their schedules, maybe what teachers work best, just talking to their guidance counselors who would best understand.
And this is Nancy. I run an academic remediation company, and there are some that are actually, we're remediating, they've fallen behind, but at least half of the kids that I work with are athletes whose parents have caught on to that, and they don't have them in school full time. And instead they come to us. We do really accelerated. It's like tutoring on steroids. It's like a sport in and of itself. And that works for families. And I think that just being flexible about not having to do everything, but finding a way to do the things that are important. And I don't know, showing kids that we can be flexible in that way. I really appreciate that, you appreciate that in a student. So.
The one thing I'd push back a little bit against is there is the reality that you have to accept that your kid's probably not going to make it. Like that's just the idea that your kid is going to make it in some level, especially if it's like something where they're going to be financially benefited from it. So, you know, the NHL, obviously you pay off and you like every sacrifice is worth it, but most of the time it's not going to be a payoff that way. And you're hoping to make your kid better. But you want to, so I think the one thing you want to avoid though is making your kid feel so special that they don't understand that the world doesn't really care about them, because the world doesn't care to some degree. And if you're always like making all these exceptions and you're like 14, 15, you're like, no, I'm going to get out of the class, I'm going to do this. Sometimes you need that teacher that's just like, I don't care about your hockey. Like you got to figure this out and work around it, or I'm going to fail you. Like you can't miss this exam. And you need some of that as well, because again, most of the time you're going to end up in university and you're on it on your own. And I'm just so, for me right now, like I'm so concerned about the 18 to 22-year-olds right now that seem to be so immature and so underdeveloped that if you keep like taking all of these roadblocks out of the way for them, then they're not going to understand like, okay, the world doesn't care that I have a hockey practice. It just cares that I need this assignment done on time. I think that's like, I had some of the same thing as Sandra talked about with having parents that weren't going to put me into a sport that was going to like involve a lot of traveling the way that like Brett's and Anita have done for their kids. And it was always like with my mom, it was always school first. So everything else was a bonus. But looking at it from the perspective of like, okay, you're going to face, like there's going to be times where you have to like do stuff you don't want to do that doesn't feel like it's as important as hockey. But in the big picture, you need to get it done so you can get to hockey, right? And that's something that's important. And like the one thing that I had a high school rugby coach who he used this term ABTR, and it was always be thinking rugby. So with that saying, he's like, whatever you're doing in your day-to-day, like I care about, and we had a really good high school rugby team. It was like one of the best sports teams I was on. We should have gone to national or provincials, but we didn't make it because of whatever. But anyways, there's some resentment still. Anyways, he was so big. We were all so invested in it. And he was like, look, I don't care what you're doing. Like, you need to finish getting the good marks in this class. Like, you need to pass your classes and not skip and not be smoking cigarettes and not be doing this because you need to be here on game day. And I don't care if you don't want to write the assignment. I don't care if you want to go drinking. Like, I don't care. But if you're not going to be part of, like, to be part of this team, you have to be part of this team all the time. So building those habits was the first time in my life, I think it was like grade 11, where I realized like, oh, like that's something that I'm actually going to study for my assignment now, or I'm going to do the work because I want to go play rugby. And it made those connections. And for me, I was really bad at making those connections as a kid. And if my parents could have done something for me better, it would have been like showing me the lines, not saying do this and do this and do this and everything's going to work out. I was like, do this so that this will work out, so that this will work out. And you develop these habits. So having some of that adversity, having some teachers that are just, you know, even if they're not good teachers and they're telling you the wrong thing, that's life. Like, you're going to have bosses that are not going to be that smart, and they're going to tell you the wrong thing to do, and you have to figure out how to deal with that. So you need to develop some of those skills, and you can't just bulldoze your kids' future, because if they don't make the NHL, all of a sudden they're left with really good hand-eye coordination and no ability to talk to other people or work and do a job that they don't love and advance through and struggle, because that's the real skills that we're trying to develop, not, you know, how to shoot a puck in a net really fast.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why I've really enjoyed putting her into the sport, is that I more because of, she's not gonna, like, she's just good at gymnastics, but I don't see her, like, she's certainly not going to the Olympics. Like, maybe there can be something like but I just think that she's learning so many skills that will translate into life. And that's something that I always kind of, and then that's what I kind of check myself when I do start getting frustrated with thinking that she needs to hit certain levels at a competition or whatever. I'm like, that's not really the point when it really comes down to it. Like, why do I have her involved in this? And it's because she enjoys it, she loves it, she's staying healthy, she's learning a whole bunch of stuff, and that way when I do start getting all stressed out about like, oh, I want her to come first, like, which I do, I'll be honest, I'm very competitive, but it kind of like, I'll check myself and be like, well, that's not what the goal is here. And like, so if her progress is slowing down, that's just another skill that she's going to learn in life, because there's going to be things in life that are going to come really easy to her, and there's going to be things that are going to be really difficult. So I feel like learning these skills and the sporting thing will translate to a lot of things.
If I can jump in there from,
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
sorry, thanks, Brett. From a training perspective, and actually kind of going along with what Rob said, yeah, your kid's probably not going to make it, like, number one, but if it's who you identify as. So if you can have your kid, if your kid or anybody for that matter identifies as like, I want to be an NHL player versus I want to be the kind of kid who works hard towards whatever I want, right? You know, also in terms of like when the time comes that if I am forced to quit, say I do get injured, and I used to be the AAA hockey player, now I'm not, right? I used to be the competitive gymnast, now I'm not. If that's taken away from you, that hurts a lot more than when you're the type of person who associates yourself with as I'm the type of person who works hard in the gym. I'm the type of person who works hard in training. If you guys know anything about Sandra, like, in fact, I actually think as much as Sandra, you may have wanted to play high level soccer, but I think what that particular situation has made you is you're so incredibly gifted at moving from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and being able to absolutely smash that thing because you never set yourself up as I'm a competitive soccer player. You even just said it now. You're like, I'm the type of person who you put me in anything and I will work my absolute ass off. Right. And that's why like you transitioned into CrossFit again as an example. And it was like easy transition because it wasn't because you were a CrossFitter. It was because you're the type of person who works your ass off in anything. So, you know, if and when the time comes that you're forced to move on from whatever it is that you do, if all your eggs aren't in the basket of being the competitive this, as opposed to being a hardworking kid, a sporty kid, an athletic kid, that transition is going to feel a lot easier. That's my
Brett, I think you're going to say something else.
I was just going to go back to what Rob was saying about like you have to learn life lessons and not everything's going to be easy. And I can say like from my experience, so I played competitive hockey also. And when I was in high school, I was in a talented athlete program they had at my school. And so we were able to pick our own schedule. They also told us what teachers were good for sports that were going to let us like miss class or miss assignments or give us extra work. Like I had a lot of teachers who like gave me extra work outside of the classroom to do instead of actually showing up to class because I had to go to hockey or I had hockey late at night. So I'd sleep in the morning or I would go to school in the morning. I'm a morning person. So I'd go to school in the morning and then go home and take a nap in the afternoon and then go to hockey. Didn't have a lot of time to do my homework. So they made sure I had teachers that were okay with that kind of stuff. And then when I got to university and played hockey there, you have an academic person that helps you. And they make sure that you have professors that support the sports program. So like if I was going to be in economics, there's like 3 or 4 different professors. They make sure that you're with the professor in economics that supports the hockey team so that if you miss an assignment or you're not in class because you have to, like you play Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you're missing school a lot. Like you're out of school. You're only in school around Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you might have a class on a Thursday you never show up for. So the professor sort of lets that kind of go. He looks the other way because he wants the hockey team to succeed. So it was good when I was in school for me, but then when I got out of school and stopped playing hockey, I was lost for a long time. I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I didn't actually find the career I'm in right now until I was in my late 20s, early 30s, because I had no clue. I was lost. And my friends used to say to me, you have to find a hobby. And I was like, what hobby? My hobby was hockey. Like I just played that all the time. I didn't know anything else to do. So I understand where you're coming from, Rob, that yeah, you need to learn life lessons and that kind of stuff. But there are things out there where school and other things do support sports. And with Anita saying like, you do learn stuff in sports. There is life lessons. Like that's why I tell them to go to hockey and sort of force them to sort of play those sports because at the competitive level, because you do learn a lot of stuff there. You learn how to be disciplined. You learn how to work with others. There's a ton of things that you learn that will carry over to life lessons. But yeah, you also need to learn the hard way too. And so I've sort of backed off as a parent and I don't yell at him anymore. I don't tell him what to do when he's on the ice. I don't correct him. I let the coach do all that kind of stuff. And if he makes mistakes, then if the coach disciplines him, then that's his own problem. Like I'm not there to sort of baby him or tell him, oh, it's okay. Like, don't worry. Or I'm going to go talk to the coach and say, why did you discipline him this way? No, I tell him like, you have to behave at the rink. When we're at the rink, like You have to be a certain way. And if you're not that way, then your coach is going to not play you. He's going to sit you on the bench or whatever he's going to do, make you skate longer in practice or something like that. So there are life lessons learned from sports, which is good. But then also, yeah, you need to make sure that you're doing other stuff like your schoolwork and learning stuff outside of that. So just to talk about Rob, just to touch more on what Rob said.
Awesome. Well, that was pretty much all the things that I thought to talk about. Does anyone have any last thoughts that they wanted to share before we wrap up?
I want to ask you guys a question because obviously I don't have kids in sports. What I do wonder is, like, do you find that maybe there's a particular threshold where it's like a certain level of competition is awesome to learn lessons, learn these different skills, learn these values, and then there's another level where it's like it's purely now. It's no longer about the fun. It's purely about, you know, AAA versus AA. It's like, because I mean, I've trained single A, double A, AAA kids. And I could always tell the kids who were in single A, I could always tell the kids who were in AA, and I can always tell the kids who were in AAA. But I also know the kids who were in AAA tended to quit the most. The kids who were in AA tended to stick around a lot longer in the sport. And maybe they didn't make it to the NHL or anything like that. But I know those kids had a lot more fun and played around a lot longer. The kids in the single A, they were there for fun. They were there for some performance. But so what I'm wondering is almost like, have you ever noticed, like, maybe having your kids in gymnastics, but not actually participating in competitions, or having your kids, instead of going all the way to AAA, just sticking around in AA? Because I've seen some kids that I've trained who played AAA who actually chose to back down to AA because they just didn't have fun anymore. And they were like, it's either I go to AA or I'm going to quit. So that's my question to you as parents.
So at our gym, I talked to Alex, who's the head coach there, and he does say that, like, he has a pretty big drop-off rate at the teenage age. So he says that, you know, like, the girls like Abby's age, they're totally into it. But as soon as, like, phones become more of a thing he said around 12 was an age where he found that a lot of kids were starting to drop off. So we'll see. Right now, Abby's very young, right? So it's like, I don't quite have that experience of when they're a bit older. So, but I do think that it's gymnastics, for example, it's a lot of hard work. Like, and it's like a lot of hours you're putting in. And as soon as you miss a few weeks, you regress. So it's just like, it's constant, like, training of the same movements over and over again. So I could see how it could be a burnout, especially eventually. And as you age and there's other things available to you that aren't available to an 8 or 10-year-old. So I could see that being sort of when you get to those, and even like some gymnasts go up to 20 to 24 hours, right? Like, which is like when we're talking about like training for the Olympics and stuff, like that's a huge amount of time, right? So I could see how there'd be a bigger burnout rate at that level.
I think gymnastics has improved a little bit since when I did it. It's nice. Like, hockey's a really good example. There are different levels within hockey. In gymnastics that are still kind of competitive, you're still, you know, playing on some level to win. And so, whereas in gymnastics, I know when I was a kid, it was very much like there's competitive and there's recreational, and that's it. And you're either going to go competitive and you're going to kind of go to win, or then you can go to recreational, which is basically like you're going once a week.
Yeah, and you're doing the same move over and over again. That is true. I would say, like,
yeah.
Now I was talking yesterday, like, they force you to choose to specialize your kid so young. Like, Abby went into recreational dance. First question was like, oh, does she want to try the competitive program? She could do that. Otherwise, you're doing the recreational where you don't really learn anything. You're doing the same thing over and over again. So I would like to see there be like more middle grounds for, at our gymnastics club, they have an invitational group and a competitive group. So they have found a way to have the invitational girls compete, but they don't spend the same number of hours in the gym. They don't spend the same number of days in the gym, but they are exposed to competition. So, and that's maybe something that wasn't available when Nancy did it. It was either you were doing the recreation or you were doing the super competitive one. So I would like to see sports find those middle grounds, because I think that you don't, as a parent, also want to spend money watching your kid do the same thing over and over again when you're like, they could learn more than this. But then it seems like the next option is like, okay, well then they have to come 4 times a week and be great. So
one of the other spots you might look to just kind of draw a line that I've always seen, again, from an outside perspective, is when you're doing a sport and then there's a point where you're no longer allowed to do other sports. Like that's kind of like, I think it's junior hockey. I'm not 100% sure about AAA, but I know like my friends had started playing junior at 16. We're like, okay, I'm not allowed to do anything else. And that's true of a few other sports where it's just like, okay, if you're on the hockey team, you can't be on the rugby team. You can't go skiing. You can't do all these other things. And I think that might be a point where you're like, okay, you're probably getting some pretty diminished returns here on this like overall like time and effort investment and financial investment as well, versus I'm teaching my kid lessons that are going to last for the rest of their life. Like that's one spot I think you could look at.
All right. Well, that was a really awesome talk, but it's about 1 o'clock, so I'll let people, oh, Chris says something. Chris is saying that.
Resist specialization.
Yeah, just talking about exposing your kids to as many things, which we talked about yesterday, how it's like you want to expose them, but then there's only so many hours, but just kind of even yesterday was mentioned, just even like having them kick a ball in the backyard or try some other sports like just at home. And also school, I'm hoping when Abby, like right now she doesn't do anything in sports, but I'm hoping school will start introducing some sports too, to just get them kind of exposed to some other things. So yeah, no, I think that's definitely important to.
And that will also cut off, that'll also cut off or increase the range of how long kids will stay in sports, because if they've been pushed into something in grade 6 or 7 or 8 and they've just been pushed into it, usually grade 10 is that drop off. They had that first year of high school and then they get exposed to so many other options and they've been tired of this sport, but they've kind of just gone through the motions. So now they want out.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming. It was really nice to chat with everyone. And I'm off to train with Sandra now, so. But all right, well, thank you, and have an awesome rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks a lot for your time, Anita.
Thanks, Anita.
Thanks, everybody.
I need
Bye.
a change, I guess, right?
Yeah, like 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, sure. I'll
Okay.
just log on the system.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, bye.